During dinner, my son-in-law threw a crystal glass at my face when I refused to pour him more whiskey. He yelled that servants must obey. The next morning, he woke up and saw something that made him scream in pure terror. My name is Harrison Caldwell. I am 70 years old, and before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to a family member who severely underestimated your worth. Growing up in the brutal winters of Chicago meant learning early that nobody hands you anything for free. I spent 40 years of my life building a commercial real estate empire from the ground up, fighting for every single inch of success. But that night, sitting in the dining room of my own daughter's home, I realized my greatest battle was just beginning. The ice clinked aggressively against the sides of the expensive Macallan bottle. It was a Friday night, and the three of us were sitting around the massive, formal dining table. Derek, my 35-year-old son-in-law, was already pouring his fourth glass of the evening. He is a venture capitalist, a man who wears his arrogance like a tailored suit. He loves the sound of his own voice and treats the people around him as an audience that exists solely to applaud his mere existence. I sat at the far end of the table, cutting my roasted steak in silence, watching the man my daughter had married slowly lose his carefully crafted veneer of sophistication. His face was flushed with heavy alcohol and unwarranted pride. He loosened his silk tie, leaned back in his chair, and let out a long, dramatic sigh. Then he held up his empty crystal tumbler and looked directly at me. He raised his hand and actually snapped his fingers. He snapped his fingers at me like I was a stray dog. "Hey, old man," he slurred, waving the heavy glass lazily in my direction. "Pour me another round. The bottle is right there." I stopped cutting my food. I carefully placed my silver knife and fork down on the porcelain plate. I looked at him, and then I looked at the whiskey bottle resting just a few inches from my right hand. I kept my voice perfectly calm, perfectly level, draining all emotion from my tone. "You have had enough, Derek." The dining room went completely dead silent. You could hear the faint hum of the central air conditioning. For a long, tense second, Derek just stared at me. His eyes narrowed into dark, hateful slits, and a muscle feathered in his clenched jaw. He hated being told no. He hated losing his absolute control over a room. But most of all, he fundamentally hated me. Without a single word of warning, his right arm whipped forward with vicious speed. He hurled the heavy, thick-bottomed crystal glass directly across the length of the table. I barely had a fraction of a second to turn my head. The thick rim of the flying crystal grazed my left temple, missing my eye by a miracle, and shattered violently against the custom stone wall behind me. Shards of broken glass rained down onto the hardwood floor. A sharp, stinging pain immediately flared across my skin. I felt a warm, thick drop of blood slowly sliding down the side of my face. Derek leaned forward, planting both of his palms flat on the table, his eyes wide and completely unhinged. He sneered at me, his breath reeking of expensive alcohol and blind rage. "In this house, servants must obey," he spat out. I did not yell back. I did not stand up and throw a punch. 4 decades of surviving the ruthless corporate world taught me that the man who loses his temper is the man who loses the entire war. I calmly reached into my tailored slacks, pulled out a clean white cotton handkerchief, and firmly pressed it against my bleeding temple. My eyes slowly dropped back down to the table. Drops of amber whiskey were soaking into the polished wood grain, staining the surface. I felt a sudden tight knot form in my chest. It was a fleeting, painful memory of my late wife, Caroline. We had custom-ordered this exact mahogany dining table 20 years ago. We had spent an entire afternoon picking out the wood together, running our hands over the smooth grain, dreaming of all the massive, joyful family dinners we would host when we grew old. And this house. Derek had just called it his house. I slowly looked up at the towering vaulted ceilings, the imported crystal chandelier hanging above us, and the massive bay windows overlooking the manicured lawn. I vividly remembered the day not so long ago when I wired $2.8 million in cold, hard cash to purchase this sprawling estate in the upscale Chicago suburbs. It was my wedding gift to them. I bought the property outright, so my daughter would never have to worry about a suffocating mortgage, so she would always have a beautiful roof over her head. $2.8 million of my blood, sweat, and tears handed over with the unconditional love of a father who just wanted to see his little girl happy. Servants must obey. The sheer audacity of those 4 words echoed loudly in my mind. He actually thought I was just some washed-up, clueless retiree living off his gracious charity. He thought the money that funded his lavish lifestyle had simply magically appeared from the sky. He believed I was a weak, disposable old fool. I slowly lowered the blood-stained handkerchief from my face. A cold, terrifying smile began to form on my lips. It was the exact same smile I used to give right before I ruthlessly dismantled a rival real estate firm. He wanted a war, and he had absolutely no idea who he was dealing with. But my intense focus suddenly shifted away from Derek and moved to the person sitting quietly to my left. My daughter, Natalie. She is 32 years old, an incredibly intelligent and capable veterinarian. When she was in high school, she was the fierce captain of the state debate team. She used to effortlessly tear apart arrogant boys like Derek with just a few incredibly sharp words. She was fearless, strong, and deeply independent. I turned my head, fully expecting to see her erupt. I waited for my fierce, protective daughter to stand up, scream at the monster who had just assaulted her father and throw him out into the cold night. Instead, what I saw in that moment broke my aging heart into 1,000 jagged pieces. Natalie was trembling violently. Her face was entirely drained of color, pale as a ghost. She did not look at me. She did not rush to my side to see if I was badly hurt. She scrambled out of her dining chair, her hands shaking so uncontrollably she could barely hold on to her cloth napkin. She practically threw herself across the room toward Derek, desperately wiping up the spilled whiskey that had splashed near his elbow. "I am so sorry, Derek," she whispered, her voice frantic, breathless, and saturated with pure panic. "I am so sorry. I will clean it up right now. Please just sit down. I will get you a brand new glass. Just please calm down." I sat frozen in my seat. My daughter was not apologizing to me. She was begging and apologizing to the absolute monster who had just thrown a heavy glass at my head. The sheer naked terror swimming in her wide eyes told me absolutely everything I needed to know. This was not an isolated drunken outburst. This was a long-established pattern of fear. My brilliant, beautiful daughter was living as a terrified hostage inside the very home I had bought to keep her safe. The burning anger inside me turned into a solid block of ice. I knew right then that Derek Thorne was going to lose everything. I would methodically strip away his fake empire and leave him with nothing but the devastating consequences of his own profound arrogance. The heavy thud of Derek pushing his chair back violently scraped across the dining room floor, breaking the suffocating silence. He did not say another word to me. He did not offer a shred of an apology or even look back to see the damage he had caused. He simply turned on his heel and stormed out of the dining room. His aggressive footsteps echoed down the long hallway, retreating toward his private study. A few seconds later, the sharp sound of a heavy oak door slamming shut vibrated through the walls of the sprawling house. The sudden quiet that followed was almost entirely unbearable, thick with a tension that made it hard to draw a full breath. I remained standing near the shattered remains of the crystal glass, keeping the stained handkerchief firmly pressed against my bleeding temple. My eyes never left Natalie. She was still frantically wiping at the spilled whiskey on the mahogany wood, her hands moving in erratic, desperate circles, as if scrubbing the wood hard enough could somehow erase the last 10 minutes of our lives. Her breath was coming out in short, shallow gasps, a quiet hyperventilation she tried to suppress. I reached out and gently placed my hand over her trembling fingers, forcing her to stop scrubbing. She flinched. The involuntary, terrified jerk of her shoulders sent a fresh wave of cold fury rushing through my veins. My own daughter flinched at the gentle touch of my hand. I guided her away from the ruined dining table and walked her into the massive, brightly lit kitchen. I needed to get her out of that room, away from the lingering scent of Derek's whiskey and the overwhelming shadow of his unhinged rage. Once we crossed the threshold of the kitchen, I let go of her hand and leaned against the granite island. I looked at her, truly looked at her, searching for the vibrant young woman I had raised. Natalie would not meet my gaze. She immediately rushed to the stainless steel sink, turning the cold water on full blast. She grabbed a clean dish towel, soaked it under the running tap, and wrung it out with violent, anxious twists. Her shoulders were shaking so intensely that I could see the fabric of her silk blouse vibrating. "Please sit down, Dad," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the running water. "Let me clean that cut for you. It looks deep." I did not sit down, but I allowed her to step close. She reached up with the damp towel and gently pulled my bloodied handkerchief away from my temple. As the cold, wet fabric touched my torn skin, I felt the fine tremors vibrating through her fingertips. She was shaking like a leaf caught in a freezing winter storm. "Dad, I am so incredibly sorry about this." She started whispering frantically, her words spilling out in a desperate, rushed cadence. "You just caught him on a really bad night. He has been under an immense amount of pressure lately at the firm. The market has been completely volatile, and his investors are constantly breathing down his neck. He is not normally like this. He is just overwhelmed. You understand how the financial sector can be, right? It just consumes you." I listened to the excuses pouring from her mouth, each one a perfectly practiced script designed to shield a monster from the consequences of his actions. She was reciting these justifications not to convince me, but to convince herself. She was desperately trying to maintain the fragile, terrifying illusion that her marriage was normal. "Natalie," I said softly, keeping my tone perfectly measured so I would not add to her overwhelming panic. He threw a heavy crystal glass directly at my head. He could have blinded me. He could have killed me. She shook her head rapidly, her eyes darting nervously toward the kitchen doorway, terrified that Derek might suddenly reappear. I know, it looks terrible," she pleaded, applying gentle pressure to my cut. "But he did not mean to aim it at you. It just slipped. He was just expressing his frustration. He drank too much on an empty stomach, and you challenged him in front of me. He just felt disrespected. It was an accident." "I swear to you, Dad, it was just a terrible accident." I looked at her pale, drawn face. The dark circles under her eyes were poorly concealed by expensive makeup. The nervous twitch in her jaw told a story of constant, unending stress. This was not the daughter I remembered. My mind drifted back 10 years. I remembered sitting in a crowded high school auditorium watching Natalie stand behind a wooden podium during the state debate championship. She had been fearless. I remembered the confident, unwavering posture she held, the brilliant, sharp spark of pure intelligence in her eyes, as she completely dismantled the arguments of privileged, arrogant boys from Ivy League preparatory schools. She used to command a room with just the precise tone of her voice. She was a force of nature, a fiercely independent young woman who never backed down from a challenge and never allowed anyone to make her feel small. We had raised her to be entirely unbreakable. We had taught her her immense worth, investing everything we had into her education, her confidence, and her future. We wanted her to be a woman who would conquer the world entirely, self-reliant and fiercely proud. And now, standing here in the cold, bright light of this expensive kitchen, I was looking at a broken stranger. Derek had not just married my daughter. He had systematically dismantled her. He had taken her brilliant fire and suffocated it under a heavy blanket of emotional terrorism and controlling manipulation. He had chipped away at her self-esteem day by agonizing day until she was reduced to a nervous, apologizing shell who flinched at loud noises and desperately cleaned up his messes to avoid his wrath. The realization was a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I had spent 40 years negotiating brutal contracts, spotting hidden liabilities, and protecting my assets from every conceivable threat. Yet I had somehow entirely missed the absolute worst threat standing right in front of me. I had eagerly funded this beautiful, sprawling prison for my own child. I had smiled and shaken the hand of her warden on their wedding day. The bleeding on my temple began to slow. Natalie pulled the damp towel away and let out a shaky, exhausted breath. There, she whispered, her eyes still carefully avoiding mine. "It should stop bleeding soon. You might need a small bandage, but I think it will be okay." I gently took her hands in mine. They were ice cold. "Natalie, look at me," I said, my voice firm but saturated with a father's deep sorrow. "Please, just look at me." She slowly lifted her head. Her eyes were brimming with unshed tears, reflecting a profound, silent agony that she could not put into words. "You do not have to live like this," I told her quietly, making sure my words carried the absolute certainty of my promise. "You do not have to make excuses for him. You do not have to be afraid in your own home. I am right here. I can pack your things tonight. We can walk out that front door right now, and you never have to see him again. I will handle everything. I will handle him." For a fraction of a second, I saw a desperate longing flicker of hope in her eyes. I saw the frightened girl who just wanted her father to carry her away from the monsters in the dark. But just as quickly as the hope appeared, it was completely extinguished by a suffocating wave of ingrained terror. She pulled her hands out of my grasp and took a quick step backward, shaking her head with frantic urgency. "No, no, Dad, you do not understand," she babbled, her voice rising in pitch. "You cannot do that. You cannot make him angry. Please, just do not make this worse." "Make it worse?" I asked, genuinely confused by the sheer depth of her panic. "Natalie, he just committed a violent assault. You do not understand the pressure he is under," she repeated, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes and tracing down her pale cheeks. "If you confront him, if you try to take me away, he will lose his mind. He has so much going on with the fund. The investors are ruthless. He just needs a few days of peace to figure out the capital issues." She stepped forward again and grabbed the lapels of my dress shirt, her knuckles turning stark white from the force of her grip. She looked up at me, and her expression completely shattered my soul. She was not just asking me. She was begging for her life. "Please, Dad," she pleaded, her voice cracking into a desperate, broken sob. "Please, just give him some space. Just leave for the weekend. Go up to the fishing cabin at the lake like you planned. Just go away for a few days until he calms down. If you stay here, he will just keep remembering the argument. He will stay angry. Please, for me. If you love me, just go to the cabin and let me handle this." I stared down at her hands gripping my shirt. I listened to the raw, unfiltered terror in her voice. She was actively begging her own father to leave her alone with a violent, unpredictable man because she believed her presence was the only thing that could somehow manage his explosive rage. She thought she was protecting me. She thought she was keeping the peace. In that exact defining moment, the final pieces of the horrific puzzle clicked seamlessly into place. The truth hit me with the devastating force of a freight train. My daughter was not just dealing with a bad marriage. My daughter was not just navigating a stressful patch with a difficult husband. My daughter was a hostage. She was a captive in a gilded cage that I had paid for with my own money. And the man holding the key was currently sitting just down the hall, drinking expensive whiskey and feeling entirely invincible. I reached up and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. I kept my expression perfectly neutral, masking the absolute inferno of calculated rage that was now burning brightly in my mind. I knew that if I argued with her, if I refused to leave, she would only panic more. Derek had trained her to fear the consequences of his anger, and she was terrified that I would be the spark that ignited the next explosion. "Okay, sweetheart," I said softly, projecting nothing but calm, paternal reassurance. "Okay, you are right. Tensions are running entirely too high tonight. We all just need a moment to breathe and decompress. I will pack a bag and head out to the cabin first thing in the morning. I will give you both the space you need." A massive visible wave of relief immediately washed over her tense body. Her shoulders slumped, and she let out a long, shuddering sigh. "Thank you, Dad," she whispered quickly, hugging my waist. "Thank you so much for understanding. I promise things will be better when you get back. Everything will be completely fine. I wrapped my arms around her trembling frame, holding my only child close to my chest. I closed my eyes, resting my chin on the top of her head. I promised myself right then and there that I would never, ever let her feel this level of soul-crushing fear again. I would leave the house tomorrow morning, exactly as she asked. I would play the role of the compliant, easily manipulated older man who did not want to cause any family drama or unwanted friction. I would let Derek believe that he had successfully asserted his dominance and chased me out of my own territory. But I was not going to the isolated fishing cabin up north. I was going to war, and I was going to completely destroy him, stripping away every single piece of his pathetic, miserable life. The morning sun filtered brightly through the expansive bay windows of the kitchen, casting long and peaceful shadows across the imported marble floor. If a complete stranger were to walk into this house right now, they would see a picture of absolute suburban perfection. They would never suspect the sheer, unadulterated terror that had gripped this exact room only 12 hours earlier. I stood quietly by the kitchen island, nursing my hot coffee in a plain ceramic mug. I had slept for exactly 3 hours last night. The rest of the time I lay awake in the dark guest bedroom, staring blindly at the ceiling, carefully mapping out the complete financial and legal destruction of my arrogant son-in-law. I had placed a small, discreet, flesh-colored bandage over the jagged cut on my left temple. It throbbed with a dull, persistent ache, serving as a constant physical reminder of the brutal war I was about to wage. Right at 8 o'clock, I heard heavy, confident footsteps descending the grand, sweeping staircase. Derek walked into this bright kitchen looking absolutely immaculate. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blue Tom Ford suit, a crisp white dress shirt, and a burgundy silk tie. His dark hair was meticulously styled without a single strand out of place. He smelled strongly of expensive cologne and sheer manufactured confidence. There was absolutely no trace of the unhinged, violent drunk from the night before. His face was a carefully constructed mask of relaxed charm. He walked toward me carrying a leather gift bag in his hand. He looked directly at my bandaged temple, and his features smoothly contorted into an expression of deep, exaggerated sorrow. "Harrison," he began, his voice smooth, steady, and dripping with an entirely fabricated sincerity. "Words cannot even begin to express how profoundly sorry I am for my unacceptable behavior. I am deeply and truly ashamed of myself. I crossed a line, and there is simply no excuse for treating you with such blatant disrespect in your own daughter's home." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my black coffee. I kept my face utterly blank, projecting the image of a tired, disappointed father who was simply waiting for the inevitable string of shallow excuses. I did not speak immediately. I let the silence hang heavily in the air, forcing him to fill the uncomfortable void. He shifted his weight slightly, maintaining direct eye contact, playing the role of the deeply remorseful son-in-law flawlessly. "I have been under an immense soul-crushing amount of pressure at the venture capital firm this past month." He continued, his tone turning slightly confiding and intimate, as if we were two successful businessmen sharing a mutual heavy burden. "The tech market has been incredibly volatile. We are right in the middle of a massive capital call for our newest investment fund, and a few of our primary institutional investors have been threatening to pull their substantial backing. I have been working grueling 18-hour days trying to keep the entire portfolio from completely collapsing. It is certainly not an excuse, I know, but the financial stress has been absolutely blinding." He paused perfectly, letting out a heavy, weary sigh that was clearly meant to elicit my immediate sympathy. He rubbed the back of his neck, looking down at the pristine marble floor before looking back up at me with wide, earnest eyes. "Furthermore, my primary doctor recently prescribed me a new anti-anxiety medication to help me sleep through the mounting stress. I had absolutely no idea how violently it would interact with the whiskey. It was a terrible, reckless mistake on my part to mix the two substances. I completely lost control of my mental faculties, and I am truly horrified that you had to witness that terrible side of me." Please, Harrison. I am asking for your forgiveness. I want to move past this awful incident. To cement his flawless performance, he reached into the dark leather bag and pulled out a beautiful, highly polished cedar box. He placed it gently on the granite kitchen island and slid it smoothly toward me. I know you are a man who truly appreciates the finer things in life, he said, flashing a charming, boyish smile that he probably used to easily disarm his wealthy, unsuspecting investors. These are authentic Cohiba cigars, the special reserve edition. It is just a very small token of my deep, genuine regret. I want to make things right between us. I want this family to be entirely whole again. I looked down at the $500 box. I knew exactly what he was attempting to do. He was attempting to buy my permanent silence. He was offering a shiny, expensive trinket to the weary old man, assuming I was simple-minded enough to be easily flattered by the grand gesture. He wrongly assumed that because I was 70 years old and comfortably retired, my personal pride could be effortlessly smoothed over with a luxury item and a rehearsed, hollow corporate apology. He honestly believed his own lies were utterly impenetrable. I slowly reached out and placed my right hand firmly over the smooth wood of the expensive cigar box. I looked up at him, letting a soft, yielding sigh escape my lips. I let my tense shoulders drop intentionally, diminishing my physical presence in the bright room. I allowed a gentle, forgiving smile to slowly soften my rigid features. We all have moments of profound weakness, Derek, I said softly. My voice adopted the gentle, slightly weary tone of an aging father who simply wanted peace in his final years. The financial sector is a brutal, unforgiving environment. I remember vividly how heavy that kind of immense pressure can be from my early days in commercial real estate development. You lose your temper, you say foolish things you instantly regret. It happens to the absolute best of us. The profound relief that washed over his face was almost comical to witness. His tense shoulders completely relaxed, and his fake smile morphed into an expression of genuine, victorious smugness. He truly believed he had completely won the mental game. He thought he had successfully manipulated the foolish old man without breaking a single sweat. He genuinely felt untouchable in this moment. I truly appreciate your deep understanding, Harrison, he said, visibly puffing out his chest with renewed arrogant confidence. I truly do. Natalie mentioned something. She mentioned that you were planning to head up to your remote fishing cabin today. I think that is a fantastic idea. A quiet weekend away in the woods will do you a world of good and give Natalie and me a chance to properly reconnect. Of course, Derek. I agreed smoothly, nodding my head in total meek submission. I will pack my bags and head out right after I finish this cup of coffee. You two desperately need your privacy. I completely understand. Perfect, Derek said, happily clapping his hands together briskly, already dismissing my presence entirely from his self-absorbed mind. Well, I have to get to the firm immediately. We have a massive board meeting regarding the new funding round. Enjoy the fine cigars, Harrison. And again, I am truly sorry about the minor accident with the glass last night. He turned his back on me and walked confidently out the front door. His expensive leather shoes clicked rhythmically against the hardwood floor. I listened closely as the heavy front door opened and shut, followed by the powerful roaring engine of his brand-new Porsche accelerating down the long paved driveway. I stood utterly alone in the kitchen, my hand still resting gently on the wooden box of cigars. The smile completely vanished from my face, replaced by a cold, calculating mask of pure, unadulterated resolve. I picked up the cigar box and examined the small, glossy paper receipt that he had carelessly left tucked inside the fold of the leather gift bag. I pulled the receipt out and read the printed numbers very carefully. My gut feeling had been screaming at me since last night. It was a beautifully constructed, plausible lie designed to mask a much darker reality. The $500 apology gift had not been purchased with his own hard-earned money at all. It had been charged to a secondary credit card linked directly to my personal accounts. He had assaulted me, terrified my daughter, and then used my own money to buy a fake apology. I did not go upstairs to pack my fishing gear. I walked directly into the grand foyer, picked up my heavy winter coat, and walked out the front door. I was not going to the isolated cabin in the woods. I was going to secure a quiet room at a local motel, open my secure laptop, and begin the absolute destruction of Derek Thorne. He had severely underestimated the quiet, watchful father. He had no idea. I took my time packing my bags, ensuring that every movement projected the image of a defeated, exhausted old man seeking refuge. I folded my flannel shirts, packed my boots, and carefully placed my vintage fishing tackle into the worn canvas duffel bag Caroline had bought me decades ago. I carried the bags down the sweeping staircase, making sure my footsteps sounded heavy and slow. I wanted them to hear my departure. I wanted them to feel the absolute certainty that they had won the morning. Natalie was standing near the front door, her arms wrapped tightly around her own torso, watching me with a mixture of profound relief and lingering guilt. I gave her a gentle, reassuring smile, kissed her forehead, and told her I would call her when I reached the cabin. I did not mention the terror I still saw swimming in the depths of her eyes. I simply walked out the front door and loaded my bags into the back of my vehicle. The crisp morning air bit at my face as I slid into the driver's seat and started the engine. I slowly guided the heavy vehicle down the long paved driveway of the estate. The gravel crunched softly under the tires, a rhythmic sound that usually brought me peace. But today, my mind was a raging storm. 40 years of surviving the absolute cutthroat world of Chicago commercial real estate had sharpened my instincts to a razor edge. You do not build an empire by taking a man at his exact word. You build an empire by watching what a man does when he believes nobody is looking. And right now, every single survival instinct I possessed was screaming at me with deafening intensity. I pulled to a complete stop at the end of the driveway, waiting for the heavy wrought iron gates to slowly swing open. I looked back at the sprawling, immaculate mansion through the rearview mirror. Derek's plausible lie played over and over in my head like a broken record. He had blamed his violent, unhinged outburst on severe work stress and a sudden liquidity crisis at his venture capital firm. He had painted a desperate picture of a man drowning under the weight of demanding investors and tight funds. It was a perfectly crafted story designed to elicit immediate sympathy. But the stark reality sitting right in front of me told a completely different story. Just 3 days ago, Derek had driven up this exact same driveway in a brand new custom-ordered sports car, a vehicle that easily cost over $200,000. A man drowning in a sudden catastrophic liquidity crisis does not casually purchase a luxury vehicle on a random Tuesday afternoon. Furthermore, my mind flashed back to an incident from just yesterday morning. Natalie and I had gone to the local upscale grocery store to pick up some fresh produce for the weekend. When she went to pay for a simple basket of groceries, the cashier politely informed her that her platinum credit card had been firmly declined. I had watched the deep, humiliating crimson flush spread across my daughter's face as she frantically tried a second card, only for that one to be declined as well. I had quietly stepped in and paid the bill, waving it off as a simple bank error to spare her feelings. But now, connecting the dots in the quiet sanctuary of my idling vehicle, a terrifying picture began to form. How could a man who just bought a $250,000 car simultaneously have a wife whose credit cards were entirely maxed out and frozen at a neighborhood grocery store? The financial math was not just slightly off. It was completely and fundamentally broken. Derek was not merely stressed about work. He was hiding a massive, suffocating secret, and he was suffocating my daughter right along with it. The iron gates finally clicked open, and I pulled out onto the main road. I drove for about 5 miles, putting enough physical distance between myself and the house to ensure I was completely out of sight. I pulled the vehicle onto the gravel shoulder of a quiet, tree-lined suburban road and put the transmission in park. I left the engine running, the low hum providing a steady background noise to my racing thoughts. I reached over to the passenger seat and picked up the dark leather gift bag Derek had handed me in the kitchen. I pulled out the beautifully polished cedar box of authentic cigars. It was undeniably an expensive, luxurious item, the kind of grand gesture a genuinely wealthy man makes when he wants to smooth over a rough patch. I ran my thumb over the smooth wood, feeling a cold, dark suspicion gnawing at the very pit of my stomach. I reached back into the leather bag and felt around the bottom corners. My fingers brushed against a small, crumpled piece of glossy paper. Derek, in his supreme arrogant confidence, had been incredibly careless. He had failed to remove the purchase receipt. I pulled the small slip of paper into the sunlight streaming through the windshield and smoothed out the wrinkles. My eyes scanned the printed ink. The total purchase price was $540. But it was not the total amount that made my blood run absolutely cold. It was the 4 digits printed right at the bottom of the receipt, clearly displaying the specific credit card used for the transaction. I stared at those 4 digits for a long, agonizing minute. I pulled my own leather wallet from my coat pocket, extracted my primary black credit card, and compared the numbers. They did not match my primary card. But I knew exactly what they matched. Years ago, when Natalie first married Derek, I had set up a secondary high-limit emergency credit card linked directly to my own personal checking account. I had given it to Natalie with the strict instruction that it was only to be used if she ever found herself in a truly desperate, unsafe situation and needed an immediate way out. It was a father's ultimate safety net for his little girl. Derek had not used his own money to buy this lavish apology gift. He had taken my daughter's emergency safety net card, a card fundamentally funded by my own hard-earned wealth, and used it to purchase his fake peace offering. He had assaulted me deeply, terrified my only child, and then possessed the sheer, unadulterated audacity to use my own money to buy his way back into my good graces. The absolute disrespect was so profound, so entirely insulting, that it completely bypassed anger and settled into a state of chilling, absolute clarity. He honestly believed I was an entirely oblivious, gullible old fossil who would just blindly accept the shiny gift and wander off into the woods without asking a single question. He thought he had successfully neutralized the only real threat to his perfect, carefully constructed facade. I slowly folded the receipt and placed it securely into my breast pocket. I placed the box of cigars back onto the passenger seat. My hands were no longer trembling with the shock of the prior night. They were perfectly steady. The protective, forgiving father who had walked down those stairs this morning was completely gone. In his place was the ruthless, calculating businessman who had spent 4 decades dismantling competitors who thought they were smarter than they actually were. I shifted the transmission back into drive and pulled onto the road. I was absolutely not going to the fishing cabin in the northern woods. Going off the grid and disconnecting from the world was exactly what Derek needed me to do, which meant it was the absolute last thing I was going to do. I needed a secure base of operations. I needed a place where I could profiling, make untraceable phone calls, and begin pulling the very threads of Derek's hidden life until his entire false empire unraveled. I drove for another 20 minutes until I reached a nondescript, completely unremarkable roadside motel situated right on the edge of the county line. It was the kind of place that catered to weary travelers, a place where people minded their own business, and nobody asked unnecessary questions. I parked near the back of the lot, keeping my vehicle hidden from the main highway. I walked into the dingy lobby, paid for 3 nights in cash, and took the physical metal key from the bored clerk behind the counter. I carried my heavy canvas bag up the exterior stairs and let myself into a dark, slightly musty room. I dropped my bag onto the firm mattress and walked straight to the small, scratched wooden desk sitting in the corner. I unzipped the side pocket of my duffel bag and pulled out my secure, encrypted laptop. I set it down and pressed the power button. The laptop screen cast a pale light across the faded wallpaper. I did not waste a second. I dialed a number I knew perfectly by heart. Mitchell Ross was my corporate attorney. Harrison Mitchell said, instantly shifting into professional mode. What is going on? Mitchell accessed the original deed and purchase documentation for Natalie and Derek's house, I instructed. We are going to war. Did he do something to Natalie? Mitchell asked. He is holding her hostage through psychological terror inside the house I paid for, I replied. I am going to dismantle him. Have all legal ammunition prepared by Monday morning. Understood, Mitchell said. I ended the call. I needed facts about what Derek was hiding. I dialed Victor Briggs. Victor was a financial investigator who tracked dark money. Victor, I need you to look into Derek Thorne and Thorne Capital, I said. The venture capital guy, Victor asked. Rip Thorne. Capital apart, I ordered. I want to know about every investor, every hidden bank account, and every outstanding debt. Find every penny. Consider it done, Victor replied. I turned my attention to the laptop. My mind drifted back 3 years to the renovation of the Lincoln Park mansion. When I purchased the estate for Natalie and Derek, Watson insisted on upgrading the property. I wanted my daughter to be safe, so I hired a private security firm to install a smart home system. Derek loved the system, constantly bragging to his friends about the advanced technology. He controlled the user dashboard on his smartphone, entirely convinced that he held the absolute keys to the castle. But Derek was arrogant, and arrogant men rarely read the fine print. Because I paid the security vendor directly from my corporate accounts. The administrative master protocol was permanently registered under my name and private email address. I had the ultimate override capability, a quiet backdoor access that I had never used until this exact moment. I opened a secure web browser and navigated to the administrative portal. I typed my master password, holding my breath as the system authenticated my credentials. A detailed dashboard materialized on my screen displaying the complete layout of the estate. The system showed that the interior cameras had been manually deactivated from Derek's phone. He thought he was operating in total privacy. I navigated to the advanced settings. I had to be incredibly careful. If I switched the cameras back on Derek's smartphone, would trigger a push notification, alerting him that the system status had changed. I accessed the notification protocol and manually isolated his specific device. With a few precise keystrokes, I severed his phone's connection to the alert server. He would still see his normal dashboard, but he would remain completely unaware of any administrative overrides taking place in the background. Once I was certain his notification feed was blocked, I initiated the master override sequence. I clicked the toggle switch to reactivate the interior cameras. The loading icon spun for a few agonizing seconds. Then a grid of 6 high-definition video feeds populated my laptop screen. I was staring directly into the main living spaces of the house. The picture was clear, capturing the expensive imported furniture and the polished hardwood floors. The house appeared completely empty and quiet. Natalie was likely upstairs in her room trying to recover from the sheer terror of the morning. I sat in the dim motel room watching the silent video feeds, waiting with the patient stillness of a seasoned hunter. 10 minutes passed, then 20. The only movement was the gentle swaying of the expensive silk curtains. Suddenly, the front door feed sparked to life. The heavy oak door swung open, and Derek walked into the grand foyer. He had not gone to a board meeting regarding a new funding round. He had lied right to my face. He stepped into the house, but he was not alone. 2 men followed closely behind him, stepping onto the pristine marble tiles with heavy, deliberate footsteps. I leaned closer to the screen, analyzing the unwelcome visitors. They were massive, intimidating men, dressed in dark, casual clothing. Thick, dark tattoos crept up their necks and disappeared beneath the collars of their shirts. They completely lacked the polished, refined appearance of venture capital investors or wealthy institutional backers. They moved with a predatory, relaxed swagger, like men who were entirely accustomed to taking whatever they wanted by force. I clicked on the audio icon, unmuting the live microphone feed. The sound of their heavy boots echoing against the hardwood filled my quiet motel room. Derek's body language was completely different now. He was no longer the arrogant presence who had thrown a glass at my head. He was hunched over, rubbing his hands together nervously, totally subservient to the 2 massive strangers standing in his living room. The taller of the two men ignored Derek entirely. He slowly walked into the center of the living room and began looking around with cold, evaluating eyes. He was not admiring the architecture or the interior design. He was assessing the sheer financial value of the room. His gaze slowly drifted toward the western wall. He stopped and pointed a thick finger directly at a large original oil painting hanging above the custom stone fireplace. It was a rare 19th-century maritime landscape that I had personally acquired at a private auction in London over 15 years ago. It was one of the most valuable pieces in my private art collection, a collection I had temporarily allowed them to display in the house to elevate the interior design. "What about that one right there?" the tall man asked, his voice a low, threatening rumble that was perfectly picked up by the hidden microphone. "What is the actual liquidation value on a piece of art like that?" Derek quickly scurried over to the painting, nodding his head with frantic, pathetic eagerness. "That is an authentic museum piece," he babbled rapidly, his voice completely devoid of its usual arrogant smoothness. "It is worth at least $300,000 on the private market. Easily. Maybe even more if we move it through the right discreet channels. I can absolutely have it professionally crated and delivered to your associates by tomorrow morning." The second man crossed his arms over his chest, staring at Derek with an expression of pure contempt. "You owe our boss $6 million, Thorne," the man growled, taking a slow, menacing step forward. "That painting is just a tiny drop in the bucket. We are not leaving here until we know exactly how you are going to settle the rest of your massive debt." I sat perfectly still in the dim, quiet light of the cheap roadside motel room, staring intensely at the glowing screen of my small laptop computer. A cold, absolute certainty quickly washed over my entire body. Derek did not just have a struggling, mismanaged venture capital firm. He owed a massive, staggering amount of money to incredibly dangerous, violent people from the criminal underworld, and he was actively trying to save his own pathetic life by systematically selling off my personal assets. I remained frozen in the dim light of the motel room, my eyes locked on the laptop screen. The two massive enforcers were still standing in my daughter's living room, coldly assessing the financial value of my entire life. My cell phone vibrated violently against the scratched wooden desk, shattering the suffocating silence. I glanced down at the caller identification. It was Victor Briggs. He had moved with astonishing speed. I muted the live audio feed from the hidden cameras and pressed the phone to my ear. "What did you find?" "Victor," I asked, keeping my voice low and completely level. "Harrison, you need to listen carefully," Victor replied, his tone grim and urgent. "Thorne Capital is a complete and utter mirage. It is not a functioning venture capital firm. It is an empty shell. Derek Thorne has been running a massive high-yield Ponzi scheme for the last 3 years." The words landed with a heavy, devastating impact, yet they made absolute horrifying sense. "Explain it to me," I commanded, staring blindly at the motel wall. "He promised early investors astronomical returns," Victor continued. "For a while he actually paid them, which made him look like a financial genius. But he was not investing their capital in emerging technology startups. He was simply paying the early investors with fresh cash flowing in from new clients. It is a classic pyramid structure. But a few months ago, the broader market experienced a sharp downturn. The fresh capital dried up. His early investors got spooked and tried to pull their funds out simultaneously. The entire structure collapsed virtually overnight. And the liquidity crisis he mentioned, I asked, piecing the dark puzzle together. "He is completely bankrupt," Victor stated bluntly. "His accounts are overdrawn and being actively monitored for fraud." But that is not the worst part. When the traditional money stopped flowing, Derek grew desperate. He needed cash to keep the illusion alive and stop his clients from going to the federal authorities. So he went off the grid. He borrowed $6 million from unregulated, incredibly dangerous private lenders. These are not bankers, Harrison. They are a ruthless criminal syndicate. They do not send letters when a debt goes unpaid. They send enforcers. I looked back at the screen. The tattooed men were now walking slowly through the formal dining room, their heavy boots stepping right over the spot where Derek had shattered the crystal glass. They were casually pointing at the custom mahogany table, the imported crystal chandelier, and the silver flatware. Derek trailed behind them, like a terrified, obedient dog, nodding frantically and offering up everything he could point his trembling fingers at. "I understand, Victor," I said softly. "I am looking at his new creditors right now." I hung up the phone and set it back on the desk. My mind raced with terrifying velocity. Natalie was upstairs, completely oblivious that her husband had essentially sold their safety to men who resort to extreme physical violence. Derek was desperately trying to buy time, offering up my private art collection, custom furniture, and every valuable item in the house to appease these monsters. He thought he could slowly liquidate my assets, while I was supposedly away hiding the missing items with plausible lies upon my return. But the mathematical reality simply did not add up. Even if Derek managed to sell the 19th century maritime painting, the antique sculptures, the imported silver, and his ridiculous new sports car, he would only generate maybe $500,000 at best. These men were demanding $6 million. Selling household luxury items was like trying to empty the ocean with a cracked teacup. It was a completely futile gesture, designed merely to buy himself a few extra days of oxygen. How on earth did he plan to fill the rest of that massive, gaping financial crater? What was his actual long-term strategy to get these dangerous men out of his life? He had to know that pawning stolen art would not save him from the syndicate. As I sat there pondering his sheer desperation, my email notification chimed quietly. It was a secure, encrypted message from Victor. The subject line read simply, "Urgent financial sweep results." I clicked open the attached file, my eyes scanning the dense, complicated legal and financial jargon. It was a lengthy, detailed application for a commercial property loan. The lender was not a standard, reputable financial institution. It was a shadowy, unregulated private equity group known for issuing incredibly high-interest predatory loans to desperate borrowers who could not pass a standard background check. I scrolled down to the loan amount. $2.8 million. My breath caught sharply in my throat. I scrolled further down the page to find the specific collateral Derek was offering to secure this massive predatory loan. There, printed in bold, undeniable letters, was the exact street address of the sprawling Lincoln Park estate. The very house I had purchased with my own blood, sweat, and tears to keep my daughter safe and secure. Derek Thorne was actively attempting to take out a $2.8 million mortgage against the property to pay off his criminal syndicate debt. He was going to leverage the roof over Natalie's head, turning her safe haven into collateral for a violent cartel. If he defaulted on this predatory loan, which he inevitably would given his complete lack of actual income, the shadow bank would swiftly foreclose on the estate. Natalie would be thrown out onto the street entirely penniless and homeless, while Derek's criminal creditors took possession of the property. But there was a massive, fatal flaw in his arrogant, desperate plan. A flaw so significant that it proved just how deeply unhinged and delusional he had truly become. When I wired the $2.8 million in cold, hard cash to purchase the house 3 years ago, I did not hand the money over as a simple gift. I had listened to my corporate attorney and structured the transaction to protect my substantial investment. The property deed was not in Derek's name. It was not even in Natalie's name. The Lincoln Park estate was entirely legally and unequivocally owned by Harrison Caldwell. I stared intensely at the glowing screen tracing the lines of the fraudulent loan application. A bank, even a shady predatory shadow bank, requires absolute verified proof of ownership before issuing a multi-million-dollar mortgage. They require legal signatures, public notary stamps, and extensive identity verification. Derek could not legally borrow a single dime against that house without my explicit documented consent. A cold, truly terrifying realization settled into the very marrow of my bones. If Derek was actively submitting this loan application, and the shadow bank was moving forward with the approval process, he was not just lying to me. He was not just stealing my art or terrifying my daughter. He was currently in the very active process of committing massive, highly coordinated identity theft. He was forging my signature. He was faking my consent. He was preparing to legally impersonate me to steal my most valuable asset and save his own miserable life. While I kept staring at the glowing screen of my laptop, my breathing shallow and tightly controlled. The glaring reality of the $2.8 million loan application was already a massive, unforgivable violation. But as I scrolled further down the encrypted file Victor had sent, the true horrifying depth of Derek's legal manipulation began to emerge. Included in the dense packet of financial disclosures and property assessments was a secondary legal filing. It was a comprehensive, durable power of attorney. My eyes scanned the dense legal jargon tracing the meticulously drafted clauses that effectively surrendered every single facet of my personal and financial sovereignty over to Derek Thorne. The document granted him total, unrestricted access to my checking accounts, my vast investment portfolios, my retirement funds, and my physical properties. It gave him the absolute legal authority to sign commercial contracts rapidly, liquidate valuable assets, and execute real estate transactions entirely on my behalf, without ever needing my physical presence or verbal consent. He was attempting to legally erase me while I was still drawing breath, but a legal maneuver of this immense magnitude required a legally sound justification, especially when dealing with a wealthy, independent man of my stature. I scrolled down to the medical and situational addendum attached to the power of attorney. Derek had crafted a brilliant, disgusting narrative. The document explicitly stated that I was suffering from rapid early-stage dementia. He had fabricated a tragic story of a confused, rapidly declining father-in-law who could no longer be trusted to manage his own complex financial empire. He painted himself as the reluctant, responsible son-in-law stepping up to carry the heavy burden of managing the family estate out of pure, selfless love. The sheer audacity of the magnificent lie made the blood roar loudly in my ears. He was planning to publicly brand me as a mentally incompetent burden, strip me of my accumulated wealth to pay his criminal syndicate, and leave me completely powerless to stop him. But a seasoned corporate veteran like myself knows that generating a fraudulent legal document is only the very first step in a massive financial crime. To actually execute a comprehensive power of attorney to force a highly suspicious shadow bank to accept it without initiating a direct in-person verification process, the document required an official verified legal endorsement. It required a registered public notary to physically witness the signature, verify the identity of the signer, and stamp the paper with a government-issued seal. Without that specific seal, the entire complex document was nothing more than completely worthless paper. I aggressively tapped the smooth trackpad on my laptop, scrolling past the dense pages of fabricated medical history and extensive asset declarations to reach the final crucial signature page. I desperately needed to see exactly who Derek had bribed or violently coerced into endorsing this massive fraud. I was fully prepared to find the typed name of a corrupt lawyer from his venture capital firm, or a shady compromised associate from his long list of questionable contacts. The screen refreshed slowly, loading a high-resolution, digitally scanned image of the final signature block. I leaned closer to the bright monitor, the harsh blue light reflecting sharply off my reading glasses. My eyes fell upon the official circular notary stamp pressed firmly in black ink at the bottom right corner of the document. I zoomed in on the image, enlarging the text within the circular seal until the letters were large and unmistakable. The name printed inside the official state seal did not belong to a corrupt corporate lawyer or a shadowy criminal associate. The name printed inside the seal was Natalie Thorne. The breath completely left my lungs, as if I had been violently struck in the chest by a heavy, blunt object. I sat entirely paralyzed in the cheap motel chair. My eyes slowly moved from the printed seal to the physical signature resting on the black ink line just above it. I knew that handwriting intimately. I had seen it proudly scrawled across elementary school spelling tests, elegantly signed on high school debate trophies, and carefully printed on her veterinary medical license. It was the precise, flowing cursive handwriting of my only child. Natalie had legally notarized the very document that declared her own father mentally incompetent. She had affixed her official, government-issued seal to the instrument of my complete financial destruction. The initial blazing inferno of rage that had been sustaining me for the past 12 hours was suddenly and violently extinguished, replaced by a profound, agonizing sorrow that settled deep into my bones. The physical pain in my chest was excruciating. I felt like the solid foundation of my entire world was crumbling into dust. For a long, terrible moment, I just stared at her looping signature, desperately trying to process the magnitude of the betrayal. My mind spiraled into dark, terrifying places. Had she been lying to me this entire time, when she was frantically wiping up the spilled whiskey and crying about his work? Was she merely playing a part to keep me calm and distracted while they finalized the paperwork? Had the daughter I raised, the brilliant, independent girl who used to challenge the world, willingly conspired with a violent monster to steal the very home I had bought for her? Did she look at me and see nothing but a clueless, disposable old man standing in the way of her husband's desperate financial survival? But then the memory of her trembling hands in the kitchen rushed back to me. I remembered the sheer, unadulterated terror swimming in her wide eyes as she pressed the cold towel to my bleeding head. I remembered the violent way she flinched when I gently touched her hand, and the raw, breathless panic in her voice when she begged me to go to the cabin. A woman who is calmly and willingly conspiring to steal millions of dollars does not shake with that kind of primal fear. A willing accomplice does not beg for her life. Derek Thorne was a cruel man who threw heavy crystal glasses at the heads of people who simply told him no. He was a desperate man, deeply indebted to a ruthless criminal syndicate. What kind of horrific, unspeakable psychological or physical pressure had he applied to my daughter in the dark, silent hours of the night to violently force her to sign that document? Had he threatened her? Had he physically hurt her? The vivid thought of Derek standing aggressively over Natalie, forcing a plastic pen into her visibly shaking hand while making those terrible, violent threats, ignited a new, entirely different kind of fiery anger within me. It was not the cold, calculating anger of a businessman protecting his assets. It was the terrifying, limitless wrath of a father protecting his child. I could not simply unleash my lawyers and the federal authorities on Thorne Capital right now. If I dropped the hammer and reported the fraudulent mortgage application immediately, Natalie would be legally implicated. Her official notary seal and personal signature were permanently attached to a massive federal financial crime. Derek had brilliantly trapped her in his sinking ship, ensuring that if he went to prison for fraud, his own wife would be dragged down right alongside him. He was using her as a human shield against my inevitable retaliation. I carefully closed the encrypted file and stared at the dark screen of my laptop. I had to know the absolute truth before I made my next move. I had to know if my daughter was a willing participant in my destruction or if she was a desperate hostage forced to sign away my life to save her own. I could not simply call her on the phone and ask. Derek likely monitored all of her communications, and the risk of him discovering my knowledge was far too high. I needed to extract her from that sprawling mansion, completely away from his controlling gaze, and look her directly in the eyes. I reached for my black cell phone resting on the scratched wooden desk. I needed to set a trap, a flawless diversion that would force Derek to leave the property while creating a perfect, unavoidable reason for Natalie to come to me. I opened a secure messaging application and quickly typed out a new set of clear instructions for Victor Briggs. I needed him to orchestrate a massive, highly visible financial disruption regarding one of Derek's smaller holding accounts, something urgent enough to demand his immediate physical presence downtown, but not catastrophic enough to trigger his flight response. Once the monster was out of the house, I would pull my daughter out of the shadows. I would finally discover the complete and absolute truth about this horrific forgery. And once she was safe, I would ensure Derek Thorne lost everything he had ever loved or valued in this world. I closed my laptop and left the dark motel room. My mind singularly focused on the absolute destruction of Derek Thorne. The drive to Natalie's veterinary clinic took exactly 20 minutes. My hands gripped the leather steering wheel with a quiet, lethal intensity. The clinic was located in a busy suburban shopping center, a bright, cheerful place filled with the chaotic sounds of barking dogs and chattering pet owners. I walked straight through the double-glass doors, completely ignoring the friendly receptionist, who eagerly tried to greet me at the front desk. I knew the layout of this building perfectly, because I had meticulously helped Natalie review the commercial lease 3 years ago. I marched straight down the main clinical hallway, my heavy footsteps echoing against the sterile linoleum floor until I reached the solid oak door of her private back office. I pushed the door open without knocking. Natalie was sitting behind her desk, staring blankly at a thick stack of medical charts. When she looked up and saw me standing in the doorway, her eyes widened in profound, absolute shock. She genuinely thought I was miles away at the remote fishing cabin. I stepped into the small room, closed the heavy door firmly behind me, and engaged the deadbolt lock with a loud, definitive click. "Dad?" she stammered, standing up so quickly her office chair rolled backward and hit the wall. "What are you doing here? Is everything all right? Why are you not at the lake?" I did not answer her immediately. I walked slowly across the room, reached into my breast pocket, and pulled out the folded copy of the fraudulent power of attorney I had printed at the motel. I smoothed the paper out and dropped it flat onto the center of her desk. I tapped my index finger directly onto the black ink of the official notary seal. "Explain this to me, Natalie," I said, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, cold and hollow. "Explain to me how your official state-issued notary seal and your personal signature ended up on a legal document declaring your own father mentally incompetent." Natalie looked down at the paper. The remaining color instantly vanished from her face, leaving her as pale as a ghost. Her knees simply gave out. She collapsed heavily back into her chair, her hands flying up to cover her mouth. A ragged, agonizing sob tore out of her throat. It was not a cry of guilt or deception. It was the distinct sound of a terrified captive who had finally been completely cornered. I stepped around the desk and knelt beside her chair. I needed the absolute truth, and I needed it right now. "Did you willingly sell me out to save his miserable life?" I asked, my tone sharp and uncompromising. "Did you knowingly help him steal my home and my assets?" "No," she cried out, her entire body shaking violently as the tears began to stream down her face. "No, Dad. I swear to you I did not want to do it. He forced me. He completely forced me." She pulled her hands away from her face, and for the first time she did not try to hide the dark, bruised skin wrapping around her left wrist. The sight of the purple and yellow marks, shaped exactly like a large man's hand, sent a surge of blinding homicidal fury rushing through my veins. Derek had put his hands on my child. "He woke me up 3 nights ago," she sobbed, struggling to draw a full breath. "He was completely frantic. He dragged me out of bed by my arm and threw those papers on the table. He told me the fund was a complete lie. He told me he owed $6 million to terrible, violent men who would not hesitate to kill us both if he did not pay them back by the end of the month. He said the only way to save our lives was to leverage the house and your investment accounts. Why did you not call me?" I demanded, my voice tight with suppressed rage. "Why did you not come to me for help?" "Because he told me they would kill you first," she wept, looking at me with eyes full of absolute pure terror. "He said these men were already watching you. He said if I tried to warn you or if I refused to stamp the legal papers, he would give them your home address and let them handle you. He grabbed my wrist, Dad. He squeezed it so hard I thought the bones would shatter. He screamed at me that your money was the only thing standing between us and an unmarked grave. I was so incredibly scared. I just wanted to keep you safe. I thought if I just signed the paper, he would get the loan, pay off those monsters, and you would stay alive." I listened to the horrific, twisted logic that Derek had beaten into her mind. He had used her deep, unconditional love for her father as the ultimate weapon against her. He had convinced my brilliant daughter that surrendering my entire life's work was the only viable way to protect my physical safety. He had manipulated her physically, assaulted her, and turned her into an unwilling accomplice to his massive financial crimes. Natalie reached out and grabbed my winter coat, burying her face into the thick fabric, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please, Dad," she begged, her voice muffled and broken. "Just let him take the house. Just let him have the money. We can start over. I will work double shifts at the clinic. I will pay you back every single penny for the rest of my life. Just please do not fight him. If you challenge this, those men will come for you. I cannot lose you. I cannot let them hurt you. Just let him win." I placed my hand under her chin and gently lifted her head until she was forced to look directly into my eyes. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my clean cotton handkerchief, and carefully wiped the wet tears from her bruised, exhausted face. I felt the final lingering remnants of the peaceful, retired father burn away entirely. The man kneeling in front of her now was the ruthless titan who had conquered the Chicago real estate market, a man who had completely crushed rivals and dismantled empires without a single ounce of hesitation. I looked at my beautiful daughter, my only child, and I let my eyes turn as cold and hard as glacial ice. "Listen to me very carefully, Natalie," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper that commanded absolute authority. "I built my empire by destroying men who thought they could take what is mine." I stood up slowly, towering over the small desk. I picked up the forged document and tore it cleanly in half, letting the pieces fall into the trash can. "Derek is not getting a dime," I continued. "He is getting a cage, and I am going to make absolutely certain that he never ever sees the light of day again." I left Natalie in her clinic, the heavy oak door clicking softly behind me, sealing my promise into the quiet space of her office. The drive into downtown Chicago was a massive blur of gray concrete and overcast skies. My mind was no longer clouded by sorrow or disbelief. It was operating with the cold, frictionless efficiency of a machine built for a single, devastating purpose. I pulled my vehicle into the underground parking garage of the towering glass skyscraper that housed my legal team. Mitchell Ross was a shark in a tailored suit, a brilliant corporate attorney who had navigated the treacherous waters of high finance by my side for over 2 decades. He did not ask unnecessary questions when I demanded an emergency in-person meeting on a Saturday afternoon. When I stepped out of the private elevator and into his sprawling, mahogany-paneled corner office, Mitchell was already standing behind his massive desk, surrounded by thick stacks of legal documents and glowing computer monitors. He took one look at my face and knew instantly that the situation had escalated far beyond a simple domestic dispute. I sat down in the heavy leather chair across from him and slid the torn pieces of the forged power of attorney onto the polished wood. I calmly explained exactly what Derek was attempting to do, detailing the predatory shadow bank, the violent loan sharks, and the extreme coercion he had used to secure Natalie's official notary seal. Mitchell listened in absolute horrified silence. When I finished, he let out a long, heavy breath and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Harrison," he said, his voice grave, "this is a massive, highly coordinated financial crime. My associates have already pulled the digital footprints regarding this specific lender. This shadow bank operates on the very bleeding edge of legality. They do not care about Derek's personal character. They only care about the physical collateral. According to the intercepted wire schedules, they are fully prepared to finalize the underwriting and wire the $2.8 million directly into Derek's holding account by Tuesday morning. We have exactly 48 hours before that money moves," I stated, meeting his eyes with unwavering intensity. Mitchell nodded firmly. "We need to immediately contact the federal authorities," he said, reaching for his desk phone. "We need to file an emergency injunction to permanently block this fraudulent loan and have Derek arrested for forgery and extortion before Tuesday morning." I reached across the desk and placed my hand firmly over his wrist, stopping him from picking up the receiver. "No," I commanded smoothly. "We are absolutely not going to block the loan." Mitchell stared at me as if I had completely lost my mind. Harrison, if that wire clears and he encumbers your property, untangling this legal nightmare will take years. He is using a forged document to steal your estate. If we block the loan right now, Derek will simply panic, I explained, leaning back in my chair. He will know I am onto him. He will immediately realize his plan has failed, and he will corner my daughter again. Furthermore, if we involve the federal authorities today, Natalie's official notary seal is permanently attached to this forgery. Derek will absolutely claim she was a completely willing participant. He will drag her down into a federal indictment just to save himself. I will not allow my child to face a courtroom battle because she was terrified for my life. Then what exactly is the play here? Mitchell asked, leaning forward, his sharp legal mind catching up to my rhythm. We let him execute the entire play. I said, a cold smile forming on my lips. We let him confidently walk into the bank, sign the final papers, and commit undeniable documented wire fraud. We let him cross the absolute point of no return. But we are going to make sure that when he opens the vault, there is absolutely nothing inside. Mitchell's eyes narrowed in intense concentration. How you are going to completely sever the house from my personal name, I instructed. I want you to immediately establish a blind, irrevocable shell corporation based entirely in Nevada. You will rapidly transfer the legal title of the Lincoln Park estate directly into this new holding company before Monday morning. A slow, incredibly dark smile began to spread across Mitchell's face as the sheer brilliance of the trap dawned on him. A Nevada shell company offers the highest level of corporate anonymity and asset protection in the country. He murmured, his fingers already flying across his keyboard. If we transfer the deed to an irrevocable LLC, you are no longer the direct legal owner of the physical property. The LLC owns the house. Exactly, I confirmed. Derek's forged power of attorney only grants him access to assets held in my personal name. It does not give him authorization to leverage a corporate entity. When the shadow bank attempts to finalize the lien on Tuesday morning, they will run a final mandatory title sweep. They will instantly discover that the house belongs to a faceless Nevada corporation. The collateral will completely vanish right out from under him. The loan will be immediately and violently rejected, but Derek will have already committed federal wire fraud by submitting the forged documents. He is going to walk straight into a concrete wall, Mitchell said, shaking his head in absolute awe. The loan sharks will be expecting their money on Tuesday afternoon. When the wire fails, he will have zero collateral, zero cash, and he will be facing massive federal fraud charges. I want the corporate transfer expedited. I ordered, checking my watch. Spare absolutely no expense. I want the new deed recorded and legally bulletproof before the sun rises on Monday. Consider it done, Harrison, Mitchell replied, grabbing a fresh legal pad. I will have my entire team work through the weekend. The property will be completely locked inside the Nevada shell by tomorrow night. But there was one final crucial exit I needed to seal. Derek was a desperate, cornered animal. When the shadow bank inevitably rejected the fraudulent mortgage on Tuesday, and he realized the house was permanently out of his reach, his first instinct would be to scramble for any other available source of immediate capital to appease the violent men breathing down his neck. He would try to drain everything around him. Mitchell. There is one more thing, I said, my voice turning incredibly cold. When Natalie turned 25, I established a private trust fund in her name. It currently holds roughly $5 million in diversified municipal bonds. Derek knows about this account. He has never been able to access it because it requires dual signature authorization, but I guarantee he will try to pressure her into liquidating it once his primary plan completely implodes. I want that trust fund frozen, I commanded. I want you to enact an emergency administrative lockdown on the entire portfolio. No withdrawals, no transfers, no liquidations. Lock it down so tightly that not even I can move a single penny without a federal judge's direct order. Mitchell paused, looking at me with deep, solemn understanding. You are cutting off his every conceivable avenue of escape. I am building him a cage. I replied quietly, looking out the massive window at the sprawling Chicago skyline. I built my entire empire by completely destroying arrogant men who thought they could simply take what was mine. Derek Thorne believed he could terrorize my daughter and steal my wealth to cover his own pathetic failures. He is not getting a single dime of my money. He is getting a dead end. A permanent, inescapable dead end. I stood up from the leather chair and buttoned my suit jacket. The gears of my massive corporate machine were officially turning, grinding forward with a quiet, lethal precision. By Monday morning, the legal landscape would be entirely unrecognizable to Derek. He would wake up in his expensive bed, drinking his expensive coffee, entirely convinced that he was the smartest man in the entire city. He would believe that his forged documents were perfect, and that his violent coercion of my daughter had secured his future. He would never suspect that the elderly father he had so arrogantly dismissed was currently orchestrating his absolute downfall from a downtown office. I walked toward the heavy wooden door of Mitchell's office, my mind calculating the exact sequence of events that would unfold over the next 48 hours. The shadow bank would process the application. The loan sharks would circle closer, anticipating their massive payout. Derek would strut into the final closing meeting, completely assured of his own manufactured victory. And then the trap would violently snap shut. The collateral would evaporate. The fraudulent paperwork would trigger a federal investigation. And the violent men he owed $6 million to would realize they had been completely played. Just let him burn. The drive back to the sprawling Lincoln Park estate on Sunday evening was quiet, accompanied only by the low, steady hum of my vehicle engine and the amber light of the setting sun. I had spent the entire weekend orchestrating a flawless, invisible financial snare. Mitchell and his team of relentless corporate attorneys had worked continuously through the night. The massive property was now permanently locked inside an impenetrable, irrevocable Nevada shell corporation. The $5 million trust fund for Natalie was completely frozen, secured behind layers of judicial and administrative red tape. I had methodically sealed every single exit. Now it was time to re-enter the lion den and play the final crucial act of my performance. I pulled through the heavy wrought iron gates and parked my SUV on the circular driveway. I sat in the driver's seat for a long moment, carefully composing my features. I drained the sharp, calculating intensity from my eyes, letting my shoulders slump forward to project the distinct, heavy weariness of an aging, defeated man. I needed to look like a father who had retreated to the woods, spent 2 days agonizing over his mistakes, and returned with his tail tucked firmly between his legs. I grabbed my worn canvas duffel bag, making sure to drag my feet slightly as I walked up the wide stone steps to the front door. When I turned the key and pushed the heavy door open, the house was entirely silent, bathed in the soft, warm glow of the imported crystal chandeliers. I dropped my bag onto the marble floor with a loud, clumsy thud, intentionally announcing my arrival to whoever listened. Almost immediately, Derek appeared at the top of the grand, sweeping staircase. He was dressed in casual but immaculately tailored weekend clothes, holding a crystal tumbler filled with clear, sparkling water. He looked down at me and a slow, incredibly smug smile spread across his handsome, arrogant face. He descended the stairs with a relaxed, predatory grace, relishing the sight of the old man returning home to surrender. Natalie stood quietly behind him in the shadows of the upper hallway, her posture rigid and her eyes wide with lingering apprehension. I looked up at Derek, forcing my hands to tremble just a fraction of an inch as I clutched the strap of my heavy canvas bag. Derek. I began keeping my voice soft, hesitant, and saturated with manufactured remorse. I want to sincerely apologize for my abrupt departure yesterday morning. I was feeling overwhelmed and I handled the situation poorly. You were absolutely right. I needed some time away to reflect on my behavior. I realize now that I have been overly critical and intrusive. This is your home and I need to respect the immense pressure you are under at the venture capital firm. I am truly sorry for adding to your burdens. Derek reached the bottom of the staircase and walked slowly toward me. He took a long, arrogant sip of his water, letting me stand there in the awkward silence, soaking in his total dominance. He actually chuckled, a low, condescending sound that echoed loudly in the cavernous foyer. "It takes a big man to admit when he is entirely wrong, Harrison," he said smoothly, his tone dripping with patronizing superiority. "I appreciate your apology. We all just want peace in this house. You have to understand that my professional responsibilities are incredibly vast, and I simply cannot have negative, draining energy disrupting my focus. I need a serene environment to manage my critical investments." I nodded my head in meek total submission, staring blankly at the polished marble floor near his expensive shoes. "I completely understand, Derek," I murmured. "I promise I will stay entirely out of your way from now on." Derek smiled again, clearly intoxicated by the intoxicating rush of absolute power. He had broken the wealthy patriarch. He felt entirely invincible. "Since you are so incredibly eager to make amends and contribute to the peace of this household," he said, his voice taking on a sharp, commanding edge, "you can make yourself useful this evening. The massive storage basement is a complete disaster. It is filled with old dusty boxes and useless junk that needs to be completely reorganized and thrown out. I want you to go down there right now and clean it up. Sort the boxes, sweep the floors, and prepare the trash for collection tomorrow morning." He stepped slightly closer, invading my personal space, lowering his voice to a cruel, mocking whisper. "After all, Harrison, you said it yourself. This is my house, and as I mentioned before, servants must obey. Keep yourself busy and out of my sight." I felt a dangerous, burning spike of pure homicidal fury flare deep within my chest, but I ruthlessly suppressed it. I did not clench my jaw. I did not narrow my eyes. I simply looked up at him and produced a warm, gentle, perfectly accommodating smile. "You are absolutely right, Derek," I said softly, my voice projecting nothing but eager compliance. "A project like that is exactly what I need right now to clear my head. I will head down to the basement immediately and get it completely sorted out for you." Derek scoffed, rolling his eyes as he turned his back on me and walked confidently toward the formal living room. Natalie cast one desperate, apologetic glance in my direction before silently following him like an obedient shadow. I watched them disappear around the corner, my warm smile slowly dissolving into a mask of pure, lethal calculation. He had practically handed me the perfect, undisturbed alibi. I picked up my heavy duffel bag and walked slowly down the long hallway toward the basement door. I opened the door, flipped on the harsh fluorescent lights, and let my footsteps echo loudly down the wooden stairs, ensuring Derek heard me descending into the depths of the house. I waited in the cold, damp basement for exactly 15 minutes, moving a few heavy cardboard boxes around to create the muffled sounds of manual labor. Once I was entirely certain that Derek was comfortably settled in the living room, I silently slipped my shoes off. I crept back up the wooden staircase with the practiced silent grace of a seasoned hunter. I bypassed the main hallway and moved like a ghost through the shadowy corridors until I reached the heavy locked mahogany door of his private home office. This was the one room in the sprawling mansion that was strictly off-limits to everyone, including Natalie. Derek always carried the physical key, trusting a traditional deadbolt over the electronic smart home locks he so foolishly bragged about. He thought a solid piece of brass made him perfectly secure. But Derek Thorne grew up in a world of soft privilege and expensive country clubs. He knew absolutely nothing about the brutal, gritty reality of the Chicago shipyards, where I had spent my youth. Before I was a wealthy real estate titan, I was a hungry, desperate kid surviving in the poorest, most dangerous wards of the city. I had learned how to pick a solid brass tumbler lock before I even learned how to drive a car. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, specialized tension wrench and a standard hook pick. I slid the tension wrench into the bottom of the keyway, applying gentle, steady pressure with my left index finger. I inserted the hook pick and slowly manipulated the internal pins, feeling the familiar tiny clicks vibrating through the cold metal. Within 30 seconds, the heavy deadbolt yielded with a soft, incredibly satisfying snap. I turned the brass knob, silently pushed the heavy mahogany door open, and slipped inside the dark, luxurious office, closing the door firmly behind me. I did not turn on this main overhead light. I used the dim blue glow of a small pocket flashlight to quickly scan the room. I moved directly to the large custom-built oak bookshelf covering the western wall. I knew the wall safe was hidden directly behind a heavy set of leather-bound legal encyclopedias. I pulled the heavy books aside, revealing the digital keypad of the hidden steel safe. Derek was a creature of massive ego and profound vanity. Arrogant men always use predictable combinations. I punched in his birth date and the founding year of his pathetic venture capital firm. A green light flashed and the heavy steel door clicked open. I reached into the dark cavity, my fingers bypassing stacks of meaningless corporate documents, until I felt something entirely out of place. I pulled the items into the narrow beam of my flashlight. It was a cheap, disposable black burner phone and a pristine, freshly printed boarding pass. It was a one-way first-class ticket to Dubai, scheduled to depart on Tuesday evening. Derek was planning to completely abandon my daughter, leaving her alone with the violent, ruthless cartel monsters. I carefully picked up the black burner phone. It was a cheap, prepaid model used exclusively by people with terrible secrets. I pressed the power button, praying he had not enabled a complex biometric lock. The screen displayed a numerical passcode prompt. I hesitated for a moment. One wrong code might permanently lock it. I typed in his birth date and his firm's founding year. The phone unlocked immediately. His arrogance was truly his greatest vulnerability. I opened the messaging application. There was only one active conversation thread saved under an anonymous initial. I scrolled to the very top of the message history and began reading. The text messages confirmed my absolute worst suspicions, but they also plunged the knife of betrayal much deeper than I could have ever anticipated. Derek was not just fleeing to the Middle East to escape his massive debts. He was not planning to pay the violent criminal syndicate to protect his wife. He was actively planning to steal the entire shadow bank loan the moment the funds hit his holding account on Tuesday morning. He was going to take the massive sum of cash, immediately wire it to an untraceable offshore account, and board that first-class flight to Dubai. But the most sickening revelation was the identity of the person on the other end of the burner phone. It was not a criminal associate or a distressed investor. It was a young woman. The messages were filled with sickeningly sweet promises and detailed plans for their luxurious new life in the United Arab Emirates. She complained about morning sickness, and he reassured her that their baby would be born into absolute royalty. He was abandoning my terrified, traumatized daughter to face the wrath of a violent criminal cartel, all so he could start a new family with a 24-year-old mistress using my stolen wealth. He had fully intended to leave Natalie as the sacrificial lamb, a completely innocent decoy to absorb the syndicate's violent vengeance while he vanished into the desert dunes. I gripped the cheap plastic phone so tightly my knuckles turned completely white. The sheer, calculated evil of his exit strategy was almost impossible to process. He had brutally assaulted his own wife, terrified her into forging legal documents, and convinced her that she was saving our lives, all while secretly planning to leave her behind to be murdered by loan sharks. I continued scrolling through the long thread of messages, my stomach churning with every single word. The conversation shifted away from ultrasound appointments and luxury real estate listings in Dubai. The mistress asked a specific, chilling question about me. She wanted to know what would happen if I somehow discovered the forged power of attorney before they could execute the wire transfer and escape. She was worried that I would use my immense resources to track them down overseas. Derek's response made my blood run entirely cold. He told her not to worry about the old man. He had a secondary contingency plan already in motion. He had been communicating with a man he referred to only as the cleaner. This cleaner was a highly paid, utterly corrupt associate who specialized in discreet, illegal medical extractions. Derek detailed the entire horrific plot in his text messages. He planned to use the fabricated dementia diagnosis from the power of attorney to have me involuntarily committed to a private, highly secluded psychiatric facility located deep in the rural countryside. The facility was run by administrators who asked absolutely no questions as long as the massive monthly invoices were paid in full. Derek was going to legally strip me of my rights, declare me a danger to myself, and have me violently dragged from my home in the middle of the night by private medical contractors. He boasted to his young mistress about how perfectly isolated the facility was. He wrote that once I was locked inside those soundproof walls, heavily medicated, and completely stripped of my identity, that I would be entirely erased from the world. I would simply rot away in a drugged stupor until I died, leaving him with uncontested, absolute control over the entire Caldwell estate. He was not just planning to steal my money. He was actively planning to bury me alive. I sat in the dark, silent office, the blue light of the burner phone illuminating my rigid face. The betrayal was no longer just about financial theft or corporate manipulation. It was no longer a simple matter of protecting my assets or teaching an arrogant boy a harsh lesson. This was about absolute survival. Derek Thorne was actively plotting to end my life, to lock me away in a chemical prison while he discarded my daughter to be slaughtered by a criminal cartel. He had crossed a line that could never ever be uncrossed. I placed the burner phone flat on the desk and pulled my own smartphone from my pocket. I opened the camera application and meticulously photographed every single text message in the thread. I captured the flight confirmation details, the offshore account routing numbers, the messages about the pregnant mistress, and the chilling detailed plans to have me involuntarily committed to the corrupt psychiatric ward. I made sure every word, every date, and every timestamp was perfectly captured and permanently preserved. I was gathering the ammunition for a total annihilating war. Once I had documented every piece of damning evidence, I carefully locked the burner phone and placed it exactly where I had found it, inside the steel safe. I tucked the first-class boarding pass right next to it, ensuring nothing looked disturbed. I closed the heavy steel door and engaged the electronic lock, waiting for the green light to flash red. I pushed the heavy leather-bound encyclopedias back into their original position, perfectly concealing the hidden vault. Before leaving the office, I reached into my coat pocket and retrieved a tiny state-of-the-art micro-audio recorder. Mitchell had provided it to me during our meeting downtown, warning me to use it only in extreme circumstances. This definitely qualified as an extreme circumstance. I peeled the adhesive backing off the small black device and crawled under Derek's massive mahogany desk. I pressed the recorder firmly against the underside of the heavy wooden surface, completely out of sight. The device was voice-activated and would capture every single conversation, phone call, and hushed whisper that took place in this room for the next 72 hours. I stood up, smoothed my clothing, and silently unlocked the heavy mahogany door. I stepped back out into the dim hallway, pulling the door completely shut until the heavy brass deadbolt clicked back into place. I walked back toward the basement, my mind operating with a terrifying absolute clarity. Derek thought he was a cunning predator, a master manipulator who could outsmart everyone around him. He thought he had trapped my daughter and neutralized me. He had absolutely no idea that he had just signed his own death warrant. The game was no longer about saving my fortune. It was about utterly destroying the monster who dared to threaten my family. The remainder of Sunday night and the entirety of Monday passed with an agonizing, crawling slowness. I played my role to absolute perfection. I was the weary, defeated father-in-law, quietly keeping to the shadows of the massive estate, offering polite, submissive nods whenever Derek walked past me in the grand hallways. He completely ignored me, treating me with the exact level of arrogant disdain one might reserve for a stray animal that had wandered onto the pristine property. Natalie remained quiet and visibly terrified, her eyes constantly darting toward her husband, with a profound, suffocating fear that made my blood run entirely cold. I gave her gentle, reassuring smiles whenever Derek was looking the other way, silently promising her that this nightmare was rapidly approaching its ultimate conclusion. And I had spent the entire morning running mundane errands, deliberately cultivating the illusion of a broken spirit. I wanted Derek to feel completely unchallenged in his false dominance, ensuring he would drop his guard completely. Every condescending smirk he shot in my direction only solidified my resolve. I absorbed his insults without a single flinch, knowing that his manufactured superiority was nothing more than a fragile glass house built directly on a massive fault line. Now, by Monday evening, a heavy, oppressive stillness had descended over the sprawling Lincoln Park mansion. Outside, a bitter Chicago wind howled against the reinforced glass windows, shaking the expensive imported trees lining the driveway. I retreated to my private bedroom on the second floor, closed the heavy wooden door, and firmly engaged the brass deadbolt lock. The room was completely dark, save for the pale, bluish light radiating from the screen of my laptop computer resting on the small desk. I sat down in the leather chair, my spine perfectly straight, my mind operating with the ruthless, calculating precision of a master chess player arranging his final lethal sequence of moves. It was 8 o'clock at night. The trap I had so meticulously constructed was fully armed, completely invisible, and waiting for the prey to step onto the trigger. I reached out and clicked the mouse, navigating to the secure digital dashboard, connected to the micro-audio recorder I had planted under Derek's mahogany desk just 24 hours earlier. The software loading icon spun silently for a few brief seconds before the live audio feed connected. A quiet, rhythmic tapping sound filled my dark bedroom. It was the sound of Derek's expensive leather shoes bouncing anxiously against the thick carpet of his home office. He was pacing. The high-quality microphone picked up the subtle rustling of his tailored suit jacket and the clinking of ice cubes against crystal. He was drinking again, likely celebrating his perceived genius. I leaned closer to the laptop speakers, my hands resting flat on the cool wooden surface of my desk. The sheer clarity of the audio feed was remarkable. I could hear his heavy, arrogant breathing. Suddenly, the sharp, distinctive dialing tones of a cell phone echoed through the feed. He placed the call on speakerphone, his massive ego requiring the room to hear his triumph. The line rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered on the other end. The man identified himself only as Marcus, a senior underwriter for the shadow bank Derek had applied to. "Harrison Caldwell's property is the collateral," the gravelly voice stated flatly, cutting through the pleasantries. "Are we entirely clear on the terms of this arrangement, Derek? If this loan defaults, we take the house immediately. There will be no extensions, no grace periods, and absolutely no legal negotiations." Derek laughed, a smooth, completely relaxed sound that made my jaw clench. "You will not have to worry about a default, Marcus," Derek replied, his voice dripping with absolute sickening confidence. "The Caldwell estate is worth far more than the $2.8 million I am requesting. My father-in-law has granted me full, unrestricted power of attorney due to his rapidly declining mental state. The poor old man cannot even remember his own bank account numbers these days. The documentation I provided is flawless. You have the official notary seal my signature and the complete asset evaluation. Everything is perfectly in order." The gravelly voice on the other end hummed in a low, approving tone. "The paperwork is indeed solid," Marcus agreed. "Our legal team reviewed the power of attorney this afternoon. The notary seal checks out, and the medical addendum provides the necessary legal coverage for the asset transfer. We are prepared to move forward with the final disbursement." Derek let out a long, audible sigh of profound relief, the sound of a desperate man who mistakenly believed he had just cheated death. "Excellent," Derek said, his voice rising with excitement. "When can I expect the funds to be completely cleared and available in my holding account?" "Tomorrow morning," Marcus confirmed. "The wire transfer is officially scheduled for 9 o'clock strictly. The $2.8 million will hit your specified corporate account precisely on the hour. Once the wire clears, the lien against the Lincoln Park property becomes legally binding and permanent. Pleasure doing business with you, Thorne." The line clicked dead, leaving the dial tone echoing loudly through my dark bedroom. Derek let out a loud, triumphant cheer, slapping his hand hard against the mahogany desk. He actually believed he had won. He believed he had successfully stolen my house, pacified the violent criminal syndicate, and secured his luxurious escape to Dubai with his pregnant 24-year-old mistress. The absolute blinding arrogance of the man was almost fascinating to witness. He had no concept of the invisible, impenetrable concrete wall he was about to hit at 1,000,000 miles an hour. I minimized the audio window on my laptop and opened my secure encrypted messaging application. It was time to unleash the final avalanche. I opened a group thread containing Mitchell Ross, Victor Briggs, and Special Agent Thomas Vance, an old, highly trusted contact of mine at the Federal Bureau of Investigation's White-Collar Crime Division. I began typing with rapid, deliberate keystrokes. "The Shadow Bank has officially confirmed the wire transfer for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning," I wrote. "The fraudulent transaction is in motion." I then attached the extensive portfolio of digital evidence I had gathered. I uploaded the high-resolution photographs of Derek's black burner phone, carefully highlighting the text messages, detailing his plan to steal the loan money, abandon my daughter to the loan sharks, and flee the country. I uploaded the pictures of his one-way first-class ticket to Dubai. Finally, I attached the most damning evidence of all the photographs of his text messages negotiating with the corrupt cleaner to have me illegally and involuntarily committed to an isolated, unregulated psychiatric facility until the day I died. The evidence of massive financial fraud, premeditated flight to avoid prosecution, and conspiracy to commit kidnapping and elder abuse was now securely in the hands of federal law enforcement. Mitchell replied almost instantly. "The Nevada Shell Corporation is fully established and legally binding. The Lincoln Park estate is no longer in your personal name. The title transfer was finalized and recorded an hour ago. The power of attorney Derek holds is now pointing at a completely empty vault." Victor chimed in a second later. "Natalie's $5 million trust fund is officially locked down under a permanent administrative freeze. He cannot access a single penny." Finally, Agent Vance sent his confirmation. "We have federal agents positioning themselves outside his office building and the Shadow Bank right now. The moment that wire attempts to clear and the fraud is officially executed, we move in." The net was perfectly woven. Every single strand was pulled tight. There was absolutely nowhere left for Derek Thorne to run. I switched back to the live audio feed just as Derek opened the heavy mahogany door of his office. He was humming a cheerful, upbeat melody, his heavy leather shoes clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floors of the hallway. He walked straight past my locked bedroom door, completely oblivious to the predator waiting silently on the other side. I heard him descend the grand staircase and walk into the massive kitchen. The distinct sound of a heavy glass decanter opening echoed through the quiet house. He was pouring himself a generous measure of my most expensive Macallan whiskey, toasting his own manufactured brilliance. I reached over and quietly turned off the glowing screen of my laptop. I picked up my cell phone, navigated directly to the clock application, and set a single blaring alarm for exactly 8:30 in the morning. I placed the mobile phone gently onto the smooth wooden nightstand, pulled the heavy winter quilt up to my chest, and finally closed my eyes. I fell into a deep, completely uninterrupted sleep with the profound, icy-cold peace of a man who knows with absolute certainty that his enemy is already dead. The blaring tone of my cellular alarm severed the quiet stillness of the room at exactly 8:30 in the morning. I opened my eyes feeling completely rested and entirely rejuvenated. There was no lingering fatigue, no heavy burden of sorrow pressing down upon my chest. I threw off the heavy winter quilt and stepped onto the cold hardwood floor, my mind operating with the sharp, frictionless clarity of a perfectly honed blade. Today was Tuesday. Today was the day the arrogant, deceitful architecture of Derek Thorne's entire miserable existence would violently collapse into dust. I walked into the adjoining bathroom and went through my morning routine with meticulous, deliberate care. I showered, shaved with a sharp razor, and dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored charcoal suit. I selected a solid crimson silk tie, knotting it with precise, practiced movements in the tall mirror. I did not dress like a retired, defeated man seeking a quiet life in the woods. I dressed like the apex predator of the Chicago corporate world, A man preparing to execute a hostile takeover of the highest magnitude. I checked the gold watch on my left wrist. It was exactly 9:15. I unlocked my heavy bedroom door and stepped out into the bright sunlit hallway. The sprawling Lincoln Park mansion was cloaked in a heavy, suffocating silence. Natalie had already left for her veterinary clinic, slipping out of the house before dawn to escape the crushing, toxic tension radiating from her husband. Derek was firmly entrenched inside his locked home office at the end of the second-floor corridor. I could easily picture him sitting behind his massive mahogany desk, staring hungrily at the glowing screen of his laptop, waiting eagerly for the digital notification that would signal his salvation. He was undoubtedly refreshing his holding account page over and over again, anticipating the massive influx of criminal capital. I descended the grand, sweeping staircase with slow, measured steps, my leather shoes making absolutely no sound against the thick, imported carpet. I walked directly into the vast, gleaming gourmet kitchen, the morning sunlight streaming through the tall bay windows and reflecting off the pristine granite countertops. I moved with a calm, unhurried rhythm, opening the dark wooden cabinets and gathering the necessary supplies to brew a pot of strong, black coffee. I filled the glass carafe with filtered water, scooped the dark roasted grounds into the filter, and pressed the heavy silver button to initiate the brewing cycle. The rich, earthy aroma of the coffee slowly began to fill the massive kitchen, providing a comforting, familiar contrast to the cold, lethal reality of the impending morning. I poured the steaming black liquid into a thick ceramic mug and carried it over to the heavy oak dining table. I sat down in the chair positioned directly facing the wide entryway that led out to the main foyer and the grand staircase. I placed the warm ceramic mug on the smooth wooden table and rested my folded hands in front of it. I looked up at the large, ornate analog clock hanging on the western wall of the kitchen. The long black minute hand clicked forward with a sharp mechanical precision. It was 8:58 in the morning. My breathing slowed into a deep, steady rhythm. Somewhere in a sleek, glass-paneled skyscraper downtown, a highly paid underwriter at a predatory shadow bank was authorizing the final release of $2.8 million. The digital gears of the modern financial system were turning rapidly, preparing to execute a massive fraudulent wire transfer based entirely on forged signatures and a fabricated medical diagnosis. The minute hand clicked forward once again. 8:59. Derek was merely 60 seconds away from what he believed was total, absolute victory. He thought he was about to steal my entire estate, pacify a violent syndicate of ruthless loan sharks, and secure his luxurious escape to the United Arab Emirates with his pregnant 24-year-old mistress. He believed he had successfully played the ultimate game of corporate chess, sacrificing my daughter and my own life to protect his pathetic, crumbling ego. I kept my eyes entirely locked on the face of the large wall clock. The long black hand swept upward, aligning perfectly with the number 12. It was exactly 9 o'clock in the morning. The invisible digital shockwave was instantly deployed. The automated banking systems initiated the massive wire transfer, reaching out through the secure financial networks to firmly attach a $2.8 million lien against the physical property located at this precise Lincoln Park address. But instead of finding a vulnerable privately owned asset secured by a fraudulent power of attorney, the banking system violently collided with a massive, impenetrable concrete wall. The automated title sweep registered the irrevocable Nevada Shell Corporation. The collateral completely vanished from the digital ledger. The system instantly recoiled, triggering a massive cascade of automated fraud alerts, freezing the transaction and bouncing the massive wire transfer directly back to the predatory lender. I sat perfectly still at the kitchen table, watching the small, dusty dust motes dancing in the bright morning sunlight. 1 minute passed. Then 2 minutes. The heavy, oppressive silence of the mansion remained entirely unbroken. 3 minutes. 4 minutes. I slowly reached forward, wrapped my fingers around the warm handle of my ceramic mug, and brought the dark, bitter coffee to my lips. I took a long, slow sip, savoring the robust, complex flavor of the dark roast, Then, at exactly 9 minutes and 5 seconds past the hour, the profound silence was violently, brutally shattered. A horrific, blood-curdling scream erupted from the second floor of the estate. It was not a shout of anger or a yell of simple frustration. It was a primal, guttural roar of absolute soul-crushing terror. It was the horrific sound of a desperate man watching his entire life suddenly evaporate into thin air. The desperate, agonizing scream ripped through the quiet mansion, vibrating violently against the tall glass windows and echoing sharply down the grand staircase. I heard the heavy mahogany door of his private office violently smash open the brass handle, likely denting the pristine drywall. The frantic, chaotic sound of heavy footsteps pounded wildly against the carpeted floorboards of the upper hallway. Derek was sprinting. He practically threw himself down the sweeping grand staircase, his leather shoes slipping and sliding recklessly against the polished wooden treads. He rounded the corner and burst violently into the sunlit kitchen, his chest heaving with massive ragged gasps for air. He looked absolutely entirely deranged. His perfectly styled hair was a chaotic, tangled mess. His expensive dress shirt was completely soaked with dark patches of nervous sweat. His face was drained of every single ounce of color, leaving his skin a sickly, translucent shade of chalky white. His eyes were completely wild-wide, with a blinding, suffocating panic that bordered on pure, unadulterated madness. He was clutching his sleek silver laptop tightly against his chest with both of his trembling hands, treating the machine as if it were a fragile lifeline. He stopped dead in his tracks when he saw me sitting calmly at the kitchen table dressed in my dark charcoal suit, peacefully sipping my morning coffee. His jaw dropped open, and he struggled violently to form a coherent sentence. The wire transfer just bounced. He gasped, his voice a desperate, frantic wheeze that cracked and broke under the immense weight of his terror. The automated title company completely rejected the lien on the estate. They blocked the entire transaction. He took a stumbling, uncoordinated step forward, thrusting the silver laptop out in front of him, as if demanding that I fix the catastrophic error. "I do not understand what is happening," he stammered, his eyes darting wildly around the room. "The bank system is showing a massive failure code. They are saying the house does not belong to you anymore. They are saying the entire property is legally owned by some anonymous, irrevocable Nevada Limited Liability Corporation. How is this possible? Where did this shell company come from? The money was supposed to clear 5 minutes ago. The loan sharks are waiting for their payment. If I do not wire them the cash today, they are going to kill me." I did not flinch. I did not blink. I slowly and deliberately lowered my ceramic coffee mug back down onto the smooth oak table. I leaned forward in my chair, folding my hands neatly together, and locked my gaze directly onto his terrified, trembling face. My eyes were entirely devoid of any warmth, any compassion, or any mercy. "I know exactly what happened, Derek," I said. My voice smooth, deep, and perfectly, chillingly calm. "I personally transferred the legal title of this estate into that blind Nevada Shell Corporation on Saturday evening." I watched the frantic confusion in his wide eyes slowly morph into a deep, paralyzing horror as the devastating reality of my words began to fully register in his panicked mind. The heavy laptop slipped from his sweaty grip, crashing violently onto the hard granite floor, the screen shattering into a spiderweb of broken glass. I stood up slowly, rising to my full height, projecting the absolute, crushing authority of the empire I had built. "You cannot leverage a massive commercial mortgage against a house you do not legally own using a forged signature and a fabricated dementia diagnosis." "Derek," I stated coldly, stepping toward him. "I know absolutely everything. I know about the Ponzi scheme. I know about the violent syndicate loan sharks. I know about the first-class tickets to Dubai and your pregnant mistress. And I know about the corrupt psychiatric facility where you plan to bury me alive." The ultimate realization of his total, inescapable ruin washed completely over him, and Derek Thorne fell heavily to his knees on the kitchen floor, weeping in the cold, brutal shadow of the man he had so foolishly tried to destroy. For several agonizing seconds, the only sound in the massive sunlit kitchen was the pathetic, ragged sobbing of a broken man. Derek stayed on the cold granite tiles, his hands covering his pale face, his entire body shaking with the violent tremors of absolute unadulterated panic. He was completely cornered. His fraudulent empire had collapsed. His escape route was severed, and the enormous, suffocating weight of his criminal debts was crashing down directly upon his shoulders. I remained standing perfectly still, looking down at him with an expression of pure, frozen contempt. I did not feel any pity for him. He had earned every ounce of this destruction. Then something dark and deeply feral snapped inside his desperate mind. The weeping suddenly stopped. The pathetic, trembling submission vanished, replaced by the blind, rabid fury of a trapped animal realizing it has absolutely nothing left to lose. Derek slowly lowered his hands from his face. His eyes, completely bloodshot and wild with madness, locked onto mine. His jaw clenched so hard I could hear the teeth grinding together. He pushed himself off the floor with a sudden explosive burst of adrenaline, ignoring the shattered remains of his silver laptop scattered everywhere. "You ruined everything!" he screamed, the sound tearing out of his throat, with a raw, guttural violence that echoed sharply off the high ceilings. "You smug, arrogant old fool! I could have fixed it. I was going to fix all of it today." He lunged at me. He threw his entire body weight forward, his hands curled into tight, desperate fists, his face twisted into a mask of pure, homicidal rage. "I will kill you!" he roared, clearing the distance between us in 2 frantic strides. "I will kill you myself, you pathetic, useless, interfering, miserable old man right now." I did not brace for the impact. I did not raise my hands to defend myself. I knew with the absolute cold certainty of a man who controls every single piece on the chessboard that he would never reach me. Before Derek could cross the final few feet of the kitchen, a massive, deafening crash exploded from the front of the house. The heavy, reinforced oak door of the grand foyer was violently kicked off its steel hinges. The sheer force of the impact sent a shockwave vibrating through the hardwood floors, freezing Derek instantly in his tracks. He stopped. He stumbled backward, his homicidal rage instantly evaporating, replaced by a fresh, paralyzing wave of sheer terror. We both turned to look through the wide archway leading to the main entrance. Heavy, deliberate footsteps pounded against the polished marble floor. They were not the swift, coordinated steps of federal agents. They were the slow, menacing, predatory strides of men who enjoyed inflicting severe pain. The 2 massive, tattooed enforcers I had seen on the hidden camera feeds stalked into the kitchen. They wore dark, heavy leather jackets, their faces set in grim, emotionless masks. The taller man abruptly halted there. He looked directly at Derek, and his dark eyes were completely dead, entirely devoid of any human empathy. "You really thought you could play us, Thorn?" The tall man growled, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that seemed to drop the temperature of the entire room. "You thought you could submit a fraudulent, worthless property deed to our banking associates to cover a $6 million debt. You tried to give us fake collateral, you pathetic, lying rat." Derek backed away, his hands raised in front of his chest in a desperate, pleading gesture. "No," he stammered, shaking very uncontrollably, his voice jumping an entire octave as blind panic seized his vocal cords. "No, please, it was a mistake. The title company made a mistake. I can get the money. I just need one more day. I swear to God I can get the money." The second enforcer stepped forward, reaching inside his heavy leather jacket. "You are out of days, Thorn," the man stated coldly, pulling out a heavy, dark steel firearm. "Our boss does not accept apologies, and he definitely does not accept forged documents. You are going to take a little ride with us right now today. We are going to extract every single penny of your debt from your miserable hide." Derek hit the granite counter behind him, his legs completely giving out. I watched with clinical detachment as a dark, wet stain rapidly spread across the front of his expensive, tailored trousers. He had literally wet himself in absolute terror. He slid down the face of the cabinets, cowering on the floor, weeping and begging for his life in a high, pathetic whine. He was no longer the arrogant venture capitalist, nor the violent husband who terrorized my daughter. He was simply a broken coward. The tall enforcer took another step toward the cowering man, entirely ignoring my presence in the room. He reached down, grabbing Derek roughly by the collar of his ruined shirt, preparing to drag him out of the house like a heavy sack of garbage. But the final, meticulously planned act of my performance was not yet complete. I had explicitly instructed Mitchell to orchestrate the timing perfectly. 30 seconds after the enforcers had violently breached the front entrance, a second, far more massive wave of chaos descended upon the estate. The wail of approaching sirens suddenly filled the morning air. The sirens grew deafeningly loud in an instant. The sharp squeal of heavy tires braking violently on the driveway pierced through the shattered front doorway. "Federal agents, get on the ground right now!" A commanding, amplified voice roared from the foyer. "Do not move!" A heavily armed tactical team of the Federal Bureau of Investigation swarmed into the mansion like a tidal wave of dark blue body armor and tactical helmets. They poured through the front door, sweeping through the dining room and flooding into the kitchen with overwhelming, coordinated precision. Assault rifles were raised and locked directly onto targets. Bright tactical flashlights cut through the morning sun, blinding the tattooed men. "Drop the weapon! Drop it now!" a federal agent screamed, pointing his rifle directly at the enforcer holding the steel handgun. The loan sharks were completely surrounded. They were ruthless, violent men, but they were not foolish enough to engage an entire federal tactical squad. The man with the gun slowly, carefully lowered the weapon to the granite floor, raising his hands high into the air. The tall enforcer released his grip on Derek's collar, stepping back with his hands raised. Federal agents surged forward to secure them. They slammed the massive men against the granite countertops, violently kicking their legs apart and securing heavy steel handcuffs tightly around their wrists. I remained standing perfectly still near the dining table, my hands folded calmly in front of me, watching the beautiful, chaotic symphony of absolute justice unfold exactly as I had orchestrated it. Agent Thomas Vance walked confidently into the kitchen, dressed in a sharp suit and a blue federal windbreaker. He surveyed the chaotic scene, his eyes lingering on the weeping, pathetic form of Derek Thorne, who was still huddled on the floor, completely broken and alone. Agent Thomas Vance signaled to his heavily armored tactical team with a sharp, decisive wave of his hand. Two towering federal agents stepped forward, grabbing Derek Thorne by the shoulders of his ruined, sweat-soaked dress shirt. They hauled him up from the cold granite floor, his legs kicking uselessly as they forcefully pinned his arms behind his back. The sharp, metallic, ratcheting sound of heavy steel handcuffs locking securely around his wrists echoed loudly through the cavernous kitchen. Derek thrashed against their iron grip, but his movements were weak, fueled entirely by the pathetic adrenaline of a trapped, defeated coward. He was weeping openly, now hot tears streaming down his pale, terrified face, his chest heaving with violent, uncontrollable sobs. He looked absolutely pathetic, stripped of every single ounce of the arrogant superiority he had wielded like a weapon just a few hours prior. Suddenly, a quiet movement near the grand archway caught his frantic attention. Natalie stood at the entrance to the kitchen. She had not left for her veterinary clinic after all. She had remained hidden upstairs, listening to the magnificent, destructive symphony I had orchestrated on her behalf. She wore a simple, elegant dark dress, her posture perfectly straight, her hands resting calmly at her sides. The perpetual suffocating shroud of fear that had darkened her beautiful eyes for years was completely gone. In its place was a cold, impenetrable strength that mirrored my own. She walked slowly into the center of the room, her gaze fixed entirely upon the sniveling, handcuffed man who had made her life a living hell. Derek instantly locked onto her, his desperate mind grasping for one final, impossible lifeline. "Natalie," he wailed, his voice cracking into a high, pathetic shriek. "Natalie, please, you have to help me. This is all a massive misunderstanding. The old man is crazy. He set me up. You have to call the bank. You have to access your $5 million trust fund right now." We can hire the best corporate defense lawyers in the city. You can pay my bail. Please, baby, you have to save me from these people. They are going to lock me away. You cannot let them do this to your husband." He pulled against the federal agents, straining his neck toward her, pleading, with the frantic, sickening desperation of a drowning rat. Natalie did not flinch. She did not take a step backward. She simply stood her ground and looked down at him with an expression of profound, unadulterated disgust. It was the look of a woman who had finally woken up from a long, terrible nightmare and realized the monster in her closet was nothing more than a pathetic, fragile shadow. She did not raise her voice. She did not yell. When she finally spoke, her words were sharp, precise, and colder than the bitter Chicago wind howling outside the mansion windows. "There is no trust fund for you to steal anymore. Derek," she said softly, her voice carrying a calm, lethal authority. "My father froze the accounts over the weekend. And even if I had $1 billion sitting in a vault right now, I would not spend a single penny to buy you a glass of water." Derek blinked, his mouth opening and closing silently as her words struck him like physical blows. He could not comprehend this new version of his wife. He was so accustomed to her shrinking away from his anger that her absolute defiance completely short-circuited his panicked mind. Natalie reached calmly into the deep pocket of her dark dress. She pulled out the cheap black plastic burner phone. I had retrieved it from his hidden wall safe just before the federal raid began, and handed it directly to her, ensuring she knew exactly what kind of monster she had married. She held the disposable device up so Derek could see it clearly. His eyes widened in absolute paralyzing horror as he recognized the instrument of his ultimate betrayal. "You forgot to pack your boarding pass to Dubai." "Derek." Natalie continued, her tone dripping with icy contempt. "I hope your 24-year-old girlfriend has a backup plan for her luxury maternity ward because you are never stepping foot on a private jet again." She turned away from him, completely dismissing his existence, and extended her hand toward Agent Thomas Vance. She dropped the black burner phone directly into the waiting palm of the federal investigator. "That device contains comprehensive time-stamped evidence of massive wire fraud, grand larceny, and a documented conspiracy to commit elder abuse and kidnapping," she stated with the flawless, confident articulation of a true Caldwell. "I believe you will find it highly illuminating, Agent Vance." The federal agent offered her a polite, respectful nod, carefully sealing the burner phone inside a clear plastic evidence bag. "Thank you, Mrs. Thorne," he replied professionally. "This will be more than enough to ensure he does not see the outside of a federal penitentiary for a very, very long time." Derek let out a hollow, defeated gasp. The absolute reality of his situation crushed whatever remaining fight was left in his pathetic body. His knees buckled completely, and the two federal agents were forced to support his entire weight just to keep him standing. "Take this garbage out of my house," Agent Vance commanded sharply. The agents began dragging Derek Thorne roughly across the granite floor, moving him toward the ruined front entrance of the estate. The captured loan sharks had already been hauled out to the waiting armored transport vehicles, destined for their own lengthy federal interrogations. As the agents dragged Derek past the large oak dining table, I stepped slowly into his path, forcing them to halt for a brief moment. I reached deliberately into the interior breast pocket of my tailored charcoal suit coat. I withdrew a pristine, immaculately rolled $500 Cohiba cigar. I took my time pulling a heavy silver cutter from my pocket and snipping the end with a sharp, satisfying snap. I placed the premium cigar between my teeth, struck a long wooden match, and drew the rich, aromatic smoke deeply into my lungs. I blew a thick gray cloud of smoke directly into Derek's pale, weeping face. He coughed, squeezing his eyes shut in total humiliation. I leaned forward, lowering my voice so that only he could hear the final defining truth of his miserable existence. "You were absolutely right about one thing yesterday, Derek," I whispered, quoting his own arrogant, condescending words back to him with lethal precision. "Servants must obey, and today you are serving time." I offered him one final chilling smile. "Enjoy the concrete floors. I hear they are quite unforgiving on the knees." I stepped back, waving my hand dismissively. "Get him out of my sight." The agents hauled him through the grand foyer, his pathetic wailing cries fading rapidly as he was shoved forcefully into the back of a waiting federal cruiser. The heavy metal doors slammed shut with a resounding permanent finality. Within 10 minutes, the entire tactical squad had cleared the premises, taking the shattered remnants of Derek's criminal empire with them. The flashing red and blue lights faded down the long driveway, and the sprawling Lincoln Park estate finally returned to a state of profound, magnificent silence. The toxic, oppressive energy that had suffocated this home for 3 long years was entirely gone, scrubbed clean by the ruthless application of absolute justice. I turned around and walked slowly back toward the massive oak dining table. Natalie was already sitting there, her hands resting gracefully on the smooth wooden surface. The morning sunlight cascaded through the tall bay windows, illuminating her face. The dark, heavy shadows of constant apprehension had completely vanished from her features. She looked at me, and her eyes were filled with a bright, overwhelming mixture of immense relief and a deep, profound awe. She finally recognized the true measure of the man who had raised her. She knew that I would burn the entire world to ashes before I ever let anyone harm her again. I walked over to the ornate wooden liquor cabinet resting against the far wall of the elegant dining room. I bypassed the cheap, flashy bottles Derek had always preferred and reached for a heavy crystal decanter filled with my private reserve of 20-year-old single malt scotch. I brought the decanter and 2 heavy crystal tumblers back to the oak table. I did not pour the dark amber liquid with the subservient, trembling hands of a defeated servant. I poured it with the steady, unyielding grace of a victorious king, dividing the spoils of a conquered empire. I pushed one of the heavy crystal glasses across the polished wood until it rested perfectly in front of my daughter. She looked down at the rich amber liquid, a slow, brilliant smile spreading across her beautiful face. I raised my own glass into the quiet, sunlit air. "To a new beginning," I said softly, my voice resonating with absolute, unwavering conviction. "A ruthless, peaceful beginning." Natalie reached forward and wrapped her fingers around the cool crystal glass. She raised it high, meeting my gaze with a fierce, unbreakable strength that made my heart swell with absolute pride. "To the Caldwell Empire," she replied smoothly. The heavy crystal glasses chimed together with a sharp, beautiful ring echoing perfectly through the quiet, liberated halls of our home.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my Father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low, but the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my Father's daughter, and I always will remain. Through every triumph, every loss, through every joy and every pain, the world may change around me, the stars may fade above, but I will always carry with me my Father's endless love. And when they ask me who I am, I'll smile and answer softly.